Once again, we welcome you to Moving Forward with Young Voices. We are very happy to welcome to the program this week Victoria Pazos. Victoria, this is our first time meeting you, so take a moment, if you would. Tell us a little bit about yourself and about your background and what you do.
Okay, so nice to meet you all. I'm Victoria from Spain, from the rural Spain, the north of it. I moved to Madrid when I was 18, and there I studied international relations. I have a little work experience in an NGO in the Netherlands when I studied there, and then I moved on to Buenos Aires where I did an internship in the Spanish embassy too. So yeah, I'm really into politics and what's going on the EU right now. That is what we are talking about. So
yeah, I'm looking at your article from moderndiplomacy.eu. It's titled "The EU Migration and Asylum Pact is Already Falling Apart." And I have to admit, when I hear about immigration and migration and asylum stories, and particularly some of the kind of more difficult news, there's a lot of that coming out of the EU these days. Talk to me a little bit about what this pact was, which was signed just a little over a year ago, and then let's talk about why they're having some trouble with it.
Yeah, the thing is, migration has been a problem for Mediterranean countries in the EU for a long time. But now everybody's talking about it because they try to do something about it at the end. Now, we've been suffering for 20 years, but now they are doing something. And what they are trying to do is not okay. It's not okay because it's going to be a waste of money and because it's dividing all the continent in a moment, like a really geopolitical problematic moment, where all of us need to be unified. So the thing is, the pact talks about mandatory solidarity. This is that there's a lot of people coming to the EU, but especially in Mediterranean countries. It's true that there's not the same amount of people coming to Spain, Italy, Portugal than to maybe the Netherlands or Poland. So they decided that all those people that come to Europe need to be relocated. So if you don't want to accept all the migrants that are coming, you need to pay to the EU for all the migrants that you reject to come into your country. So that's a really big issue. For example, Poland is really against it because they say they don't have the capability for do that. And they already have a lot of migrants from the UK, but they want to give them more. It's becoming a really big issue.
Wow. And that's, this was one of the questions that I had was, where do all of these migrants and asylum seekers come from? Obviously, I could see Ukraine being a very ready source of that. But what are some of the other nations that EU member countries are seeing these asylum seekers and migrants coming from?
It depends a lot on the country. But it's true that, for example, in Spain, we have a lot of immigration from Morocco, Algeria, all come from Mediterranean, especially to the Canary Islands. It's true that, for example, Italy and Spain have a lot of migration too from Latin America. Because of cultural similarities, they usually come more from our countries than others. So yeah, it depends on, but they are really focused, especially on people who come from Northern Africa, because they cross the Mediterranean in boats. That is a really difficult and dangerous route. So they are really worried about that.
And for the members of this pact, the EU countries that have signed on to this, you mentioned in the article that one of the main stipulations here is it's mandatory. They have to meet these requirements. And talk to us about some of these requirements and why this becomes so burdensome for some of the countries. What are they required to do?
They say that if you don't accept the amount of immigrants that they are gonna assign to you, because they are gonna assign to you, not have an agreement, you have to pay 20,000 for each 20,000 euros for each immigrant you don't want to relocate in your country. But it's not just that. The thing is, everything in the EU is really, really bureaucratic. So when an immigrant comes to your country, you have to register the immigrant, and you have to pay for all the time the immigrant is in your country, and then paying for that immigrant to go to another country. So it's a lot of money waste on that person, you know?
It does sound burdensome. And of course, you mentioned in here too, there's, there are language barriers that are faced, cultural barriers that come into play here. You mentioned some of the countries have pushed back, but why did so many go along with it? Did they just feel they had no better alternative?
I mean, I think, when maybe some countries are not really agree with this pact, but they need the EU for another things that they are doing or for another agreements. For example, we have a lot of fishing problems and agreements with agriculture. We have a lot of protests about agriculture. So a lot of countries say yes to this because they want a yes from the EU for another things, you know? So I feel like that's the thing going on there.
It sounds as though it's well intended, but this kind of central planning doesn't necessarily mesh with reality very well, given that, as you point out in your articles, some of these countries have more limited resources than others.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if we don't have a social service, maybe it would be okay to have so many immigrants, you know? But the thing is, like, most of the countries of the EU have one, and the system is not prepared for such an amount of people because there's a lot of people coming right now. So yeah, I think that's a big issue. And the thing is, like, it's not just that, it's the fact that probably that immigrant for example, a Latin American immigrant who arrived to Spain, moved to Germany. They are probably coming back to Spain because of cultural similarities and because there is like a really big community of Latin people living in Spain, you know, so it's a waste of money. It had no sense.
You point out in your article too that as well intended as the pact may be, it's a short-term solution. What's the root cause of all of this immigration?
I think right now this increment in people coming is a little bit a pull effect because we are making so easy coming to the EU, especially in some countries like Spain, where it's a kind of easy to, have the nationality. If you have like a grandparent from Spain, you are a Spaniard, you know? So we are making it so easy that a lot of people are saying, okay, my country is in a bad condition. I'm going to try it. I'm going to try it and let's see. But that I'm going to try it is a lot of money for my country, you know? So I think it's a little bit of that.
And we've got about a minute or so left here. Let's talk a little bit about what is the right solution to the asylum seeking and migration problems that are facing these EU member countries?
Respect national sovereignty. Like, each country know how much they can do for this problem and know their conditions about their social service system. So I think EU is great, but in this topic, we need each country confront our problem.
So what will it take? I mean, who has to be the decision maker? Is it the members of the EU Parliament, or I guess I'm trying to see what's the way forward toward a solution.
That's difficult. I mean, I think it's something that needs to come from each country, and then if each country protests, maybe the EU decides to do something. But it needs a lot of countries to agree on it, and it's gonna be really, really difficult.
So, where is the greatest resistance coming from? Is it from politicians or is it from the actual people in these countries, the citizens?
I feel there's a really big, we are seeing a lot of people against democratic values nowadays. And I feel that's because politicians are not in contact with people anymore. Like, necessity of people is not what they are talking about. So I feel resistance is coming from people who are seeing like what they want, they are not having it. So yeah, it's from the top, but politicians are, I don't know, not doing anything, not listening.
Okay, we have to stop here because unfortunately we're out of time, but we were talking with Victoria Pazos, a Young Voices contributor. Where can people find you on social media?
Victoria Pazos 24 /, and that's all.
Welcome back to Moving Forward with Young Voices. Hey, we're happy to welcome Gabriela Blanco back to the program. Gabriela, it's good to see you once again. For those meeting you for the first time, take a moment, tell us just a little bit about yourself.
Yes, absolutely. I was born and raised in Havana, Cuba. I lived there until I was 24. I now live in Austin, Texas, here in the United States. And I've been blessed enough to be able to work with organizations like the Dissident Project. Basically, our goal is to educate younger American audiences regarding what it looks like to grow up under a socialist or communist regime, in this case, and hopefully help young voters make smart decisions in the future and just get the word out there. So that's pretty much what we do today.
Well, I'm looking at an article that you've written for realclearworld.com. It's titled The Fruit of Authoritarianism in Cuba. And I have to admit, when I saw the title, I thought, oh, I understand exactly what she's going to be talking about here. Mm-hmm. I didn't, because I didn't realize. I mean, you talk about how Cuba people who are concerned about human rights have pointed at Cuba for many, many years and said, this is not good. There's a lot of human rights violations going on. I did not realize that children, though, were especially vulnerable under the authoritarian regime. Tell me a little bit about some of the particular dangers that children face.
Absolutely. So this is one of the sides that people may not know about Cuba. They actually managed to save the economy after the collapse of the Soviet Union by sex trafficking the children. And they learned to capture the millions of dollars that sex tourism brings in every year. With that, they use legal loopholes and extremely minimal penalties for anything sex crime related. So like the current penal code, for example, the current age of consent in Cuba is 16. However, there's a big loophole, and that's minors ages 12 and through 16. Sex with them will only be penalized if coercion or abuse of authority is found, or if a legal guardian files a complaint, which means that sexual relations with minors 12 and older are pretty much never convicted. And even in those cases that are where legal action is taken, the penalties are 3 months to 1 year. So pretty much Cuba is a free-for-all for anyone looking for a place with very relaxed and very minimal laws when it comes to protecting children. And Cuba has managed to capture millions and millions of dollars with sex tourism that way.
Okay, so the question has to follow then, what can be done about this? I know there are people who would like to hold those Cuban officials accountable. Is there anything that is happening to put a stop to this practice and bring those who've been involved in it to justice?
Yeah, well, the first thing we need to do, and that's why I wrote the article, it was in response to a letter that a U.S. congressman sent to Homeland Security in March with the names of over 100 Cuban officials that are currently here in the United States that requested asylum and now live here. And he was requesting for further investigation and if applicable for the deportation of these individuals as the first step to starting to take them accountable, because they have managed to profit off the exploitation of children in Cuba for decades. And now they get to retire in the United States, along with those actual victims that also received no legal asylum over here. So what we're hoping to do is starting to have some accountability and for the U.S. immigration system to look into these cases, especially with the current administration. They seem, willing to want to look into it. So we're hoping that they'll finally start with this list, and for the future, for more restrictions for anyone that has been involved with the Cuban legal system, whether you were working in the judicial branch and you were just, handing out sentences, or you were enforcing the law on the streets as a police officer, you were part of that system of oppression that profits of the trafficking of people, especially of children. So they need to be investigated and they need to be brought to justice, or at the very least deported back to the country they defended so much.
So when you were growing up in Cuba, you mentioned in the article, you saw minor classmates and friends that would spend time with older foreign tourists as a quick way to make money. Now, what was all of that sex trafficking, or I guess what I'm asking is, can there be anything innocent about those kind of encounters, or is it all pretty much on the dark side of things?
It's going to be on the dark side of things. There's never a good reason why an older tourist from any country should be spending time with a 10-year-old, 11-year-old Cuban unsupervised. And this happens in broad daylight. We all grew up with it. Every Cuban knows it's true. It's allowed. It mostly happens in government-owned hotels. Everything is pretty much, every establishment is pretty much government-owned. So hotels, restaurants, it's pretty common. You'll see it happening there. They have security, you have police on the streets, you'll bribe someone. Again, it's very difficult to bring anyone to justice when you need to actually prove there was extreme violence involved, or one of those guardians, files a complaint and has evidence. So this is very difficult, and that's why sex trafficking convictions are pretty much non-existent. We had 10 in 2020, and we had 6 in 2022, in a country that has almost 90,000 prostitutes, an estimate.
Wow.
And many of those are minors. So this happens everywhere, and it is known. And the Cuban government turns a blind eye because a huge part of that tourism income has to do with the sex and minors.
So where does a solution begin for a problem like this? Is it you mentioned that many of these are former Cuban officials that have quietly immigrated to the U.S. and they're living lives like nothing else happened, but their victims are still kind of bearing the scars and emotional baggage that goes along with having been a part of this. Do these people who are involved, do they face justice here in the U.S.? For that matter, the patrons of these underage companions, where do they face justice?
Right. So the first thing that needs to happen is obviously a change of system, a change to the penal code, and for actual protections around children to exist. We're not going to find those in an authoritarian country that really profits off of that, and really needs less parental protection and less just protection in general of individuals, minors and adults, because that's how they survive. The important part about the United States involvement is because most of them migrate over here. And so for decades, if there hasn't been any consequence of that, that needs to change, because people need to realize that before they get into any involvement with a government like this, that there will be consequences, and that if you ever plan on leaving for any other country, not just the US, that you will be persecuted to the full extent of the law, because these people may not have a criminal record in Cuba or in the US, but they are criminals, and they have actively been involved in perpetuating this type of sex trafficking and trafficking of humans in general. So, yeah.
Wow. I'll admit this is the first that I've ever been made aware of this, and it's stunning. And yet you point out in your article, it's not just a legislative failure on the part of policymakers in Cuba, but that actually the type of government, the authoritarian type of government that they have, sees the family as a threat. This is a logical conclusion of where you end up with that kind of ideology.
Exactly. This is just another example of how the Cuban government needs a weak family unit, needs children vulnerable, needs women vulnerable. Cuba has forever, since the revolution, have been pushing for abortion, divorce, less parental control, and more time for those kids to be spending in government institutions. So just really everything around the kids and the family units. So that's the first thing that will need to change, and it will never change until that government is out.
And we've only got about a minute left here, but how does that government go out? Is it something that's going to have to happen from within from Cuba, or is it something that's going to require some help from outside of Cuba?
It's going to have to happen from inside of Cuba, but we need international support. We need every organization that has been supporting the Cuban government and funding the Cuban government, and every tourist that plans on going to Cuba to stay at a government institution, to spend money over there, to look for, the entertainment that they're not going to find over here. We need all of that to stop, because that's the pipeline that has been keeping them going. So it needs to be a joint effort.
Again, we are speaking with Gabriela Blanco. She is with the Dissident Project and Ladies of Liberty Alliance, and a contributor to Young Voices. Where can people find you online?
Yes, you can find me on Instagram under Gabby Blanco, same on X, and you can find, most importantly, the Dissident Project under the same name on Facebook, Instagram, X, and hopefully book us. We'll come to your school and talk to the kids.
And we are back. This is Moving Forward with Young Voices. Happy to welcome Ian Golan back to the program. Ian, this isn't your first time on the show, but for folks who are meeting you for the very first time, take a moment to tell us about who you are and what you do.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Brian. Yeah, I've been before talking about conscription, but I live in Finland, so I'm also kind of interested in the nicotine policy as well. I work with Students for Liberty. I'm a national coordinator here in Finland, and I'm the executive publisher for Speak Freely magazine, which is like a European magazine run by Students for Liberty as well.
I'm looking at an article you've written for Modern Diplomacy about how you're a non-smoker, but you still don't want high cigarette taxes. And before we talk about the cigarette taxes in the EU, I've been to Europe a couple of times, and I have to admit, one of the things that really kind of surprised me was they have some very aggressive anti-smoking or anti-cigarette tactics. One of the big ones was, I remember stopping into a gas station or something and seeing cigarette packs with horrible, lung cancer photos and things that were, to show this is what happens when you smoke cigarettes. So clearly, there's some strong pressure, but let's talk about the taxes. Why is raising taxes as a means of discouraging cigarette smoking, why is that not a good idea?
Well, I think even in the Bible, you can see that banning things didn't work out for God even. So how can people do it? But basically the problem is the taxes on cigarettes are so high at the moment that further bans will only fuel the black market. So I think the European Taxpayers Union Association has provided a study where they say that basically even though the taxes on cigarettes are supposed to increase by 30%, the actual revenue of the government will further fall down. So there won't be even like the tax revenue benefit to the new tax because the taxes are so high. People will just go to black markets. I think there's this very interesting example of Great Britain where there has been the amount of cigarettes people smoke for the last 10 years has been pretty stable. So people smoke, just the same amount. But the amount of legal cigarettes that were sold has fallen sharply. So there has been like a fall by 40% in how many legal cigarettes have been smoked by people. So this means that obviously people are going to the black market, and there's like, you can see, if you go to England, you can see that there's like illegal packets of cigarettes which are not marked by the authorities out there, and people are just going to the black market, which is a huge problem.
Oh, it's got to be great news for some enterprising black marketeer. Well, people want this, and they'll pay a premium price for it. So, I'll fill that need. But of course, now you have more illegal activity, things that have to be done in the shadows, and I would assume that possibly could maybe lead to some corruption on the part of officials who are charged with enforcing those regulations.
Yeah. There's definitely a lot of that going on. But there's also a lot of violence, which is, I think, the bigger problem. So if you look there, because there are still legal businesses which do sell tobacco in many of the countries, but now they face this violence from the gangs which don't work under the law. So they actually do like fire bombings on the legal shops, and there's like it's kind of crazy. So
Wow.
Australia, which is one of the countries which had some of the strictest rules for a while. So for instance, you talked about the European packaging, but in Australia, they actually would mark on each cigarette. Quite recently, they did this regulation where there's like a word, there's like text saying that cigarettes kill on each cigarette. So it's not only the package. And so they have been like at the frontier of like fighting against tobacco with high taxes and such. And this has backfired disastrously. So I think The Guardian, which used to be the publication which was very pro all the tobacco taxes, has admitted that Australia doesn't work, and that the gang violence and all the sort of issues that they have created are absolutely not worth it. So it's kind of interesting to see this sort of very basic libertarian principle that you just should let people play out in the real world and show what disastrous consequences of regulation you can see.
Well, it does definitely seem to be more evidence that prohibition of whatever, you name it, whether it's alcohol or some type of illicit drug or cigarettes, prohibition. If people want a particular product, they're going to find a way to get it. By the way, I don't mean to catch you off guard, but I'm just curious. A pack of cigarettes in the EU, just what's kind of an average cost? How much does it cost to buy a pack of cigarettes?
That's a bit tough. So, for instance, I used to live in Luxembourg, which is this country, which is like this very small country in between Belgium, France, and Germany. And what they do there is they have very, very low taxes on the cigarettes. So everyone from like Germany and France comes in. So I believe a packet of cigarettes would cost €6 in Luxembourg, but outside of Luxembourg, that could be like 10, even €15 in some of the most extreme cases. So it's a lot of money and especially if someone smokes a lot, it makes sense to even like make a trip to Luxembourg and spend all this time and gasoline on the way just to buy like loads of cigarettes in Luxembourg.
Okay, so taxing and otherwise prohibiting things like that or discouraging things like that will have some unintended consequences. Is there a better way to approach trying to persuade the public or to shift public attitudes towards smoking to where less people would want to smoke?
Most definitely. So I think the easiest approach should be, let's look at the countries that do it the best. And Sweden is the country that has the lowest rates of smoking. So I think EU average is around 20%, and Sweden is at 5% of people smoking. So let's see what Sweden did so good. And what they did is simply they searched for alternatives. So it's very hard to like quit smoking on its own. But it's the nicotine, which is like the addictive substance. But nicotine on its own is much more healthy. I wouldn't recommend it, of course. But if you have to choose between two evils, this is the best way to reduce the harm of smoking. So they came up with all those very elaborate nicotine products. There's like they have like the snus, which is like a nicotine pouch. I think they're called Zins in America. So basically, this is what a lot of people do instead of smoking, and it has helped quit huge amounts of people. So Sweden is leading the way in harm reduction, and so it's about giving smokers safer alternatives such as vaping, such as nicotine pouches, and that's the way forward.
And I appreciate that I think you make the point well in your article too that those alternatives. No, they're not perfectly safe, but they are safer than smoking cigarettes. So it's a move in the right direction, I guess is how I would put it.
Yeah, and I think one concern people have is what if people who would never smoke are getting hooked on nicotine because of those alternatives. But thankfully, there was like this Eurobarometer survey which studied people across EU and found that people are actually not like getting into vaping. And it is not new people who get into vaping. It is the smokers who get into vaping and quit smoking thanks to those alternatives and thanks to nicotine pouches and such.
Okay, we've got about 1 minute, but I have to ask you. You don't smoke, but you still don't. You don't want to see these higher taxes. Why is that? Why would a non-smoker oppose higher cigarette taxes?
I just think people should have a choice. I had this interesting experience in Serbia where this is the only country where people actually still smoke indoors, and I did kind of hate that. But I think as long as there's like no secondhand smoke and we should just let people do with their lives as they want. I think smokers deserve freedom as well.
I have to tip my hat to you for being, I think a good advocate of the personal principles of liberty, which means sometimes people will do things you don't agree with, but you're willing to let them make their own decisions. Again, we're talking with Ian Golan. Ian, where can people find you on social media so that they can follow your work as well?
Yeah, you're welcome to follow me on Twitter at Ian Golan on X as it is called now.
That's okay.
I'm sticking with Twitter. I'm not giving up on the name.
Hey, thank you so much for your time. Great to visit with you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
Welcome back to Moving Forward with Young Voices. This is our fourth and final segment today, and we are happy to welcome to the program Antonia-Laura Pup, who is a policy fellow with Young Voices Europe. Antonia, very nice to meet you. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Thank you very much for having me. So I am a Romanian that is currently based in the United States, where I am a Fulbright scholar at Georgetown University, working on foreign and security policy issues. My, well-known and well-loved area of research is Black Sea security, but also I examine transatlantic affairs writ large. Prior to that, I also studied and worked in Paris, but my primary professional activity that I'm still proud of today is the fact that I was a policy advisor working with the youngest chairman of the Defense Committee in our legislature in the National Parliament. So I'm very happy to be here and share my thoughts with you.
I'm looking at an article that you've written for EU Reporter on strengthening cyber offensive capabilities. EU member states cannot wait after Brussels. And first of all, let's talk a little bit about cybersecurity. We kind of take for granted that all of the online world, both private as well as the governmental systems, are going to work until they don't. And clearly there are some bad actors out there who are either hacking to steal from people or to steal information or to just cause mischief. Talk to me about what do these European Union members, first of all, where do they stand in terms of protecting their cyber defense infrastructure? I would assume that's something they take seriously, but it sounds like there's room for improvement.
Here, I think that there are two layers of the response. First of all, we have the EU member states acting as national governments. And I think that here we have, of course, different levels of maturity. We have countries on the eastern flank who are more inclined to, or have been more inclined for a while now, to invest more in their cyber defenses because they've seen and they know what Russia means. And Russia, we all know, it's the biggest security threat that Europe is facing right now. And in that sense, I would say that we have other countries that are not so inclined to invest in cyber defense capabilities because they are not the first countries that are targeted by these malicious actors. But I think here it's important to say that when we are talking about the risks and the actors that interfere in our cyberspace, we not only have state actors, but we have cyber criminals, hacktivists, and basically a wide range of non-state actors that can access our cyber environment and create disturbance. So you don't necessarily have to be a country that is at war or a country that has pissed off China and Russia to be a target. In the second layer of the response, we have the European Union, which, because has all its major decisions on topics concerning security, has to be taken by unanimity. We, of course, have the lowest common denominator that basically led us to have cyber defenses at the EU level that are only cyber defenses. And in my piece, and I very much stand by this point of view, that it's high time that the European Union does more for cyber offensive capabilities. I very much think that the security situation in which Europe is right now shows us that, at least in the cyber environment, offense is usually the best defense. And I believe that investing in cyber offensive capabilities will ultimately have a deterrent effect on our adversaries.
Very interesting. I'll admit this is a world in which, or this is a subject in which I'm not well informed, but thanks to you, I'm becoming better informed. But I didn't realize that the EU, and I'm sure there are other nations and groups out there that have taken more of a defensive, passive posture. But you make a very strong case that if you can't retaliate against someone who is up to cyber mischief, really you aren't even in the game. You're not in a good position.
Yeah, and in that case, we saw my country, which has been one of the largest suppliers of aid, military aid, but also humanitarian aid to Ukraine, that has been a target for the Russian cyber attacks. We have seen 86,000 cyber attacks targeting Romania's electoral system. We just had presidential elections. So there is a geopolitical risk associated with that. And cyber, although I don't think that cyber will be the first and main domain in which wars of the future will be fought, and Ukraine showed us that we are in an area where conventional warfare is very, very, very widely used still. I think that we can see cyber capabilities being used to limit these countries' policy autonomy, and which is why I think we should move forward as nations, first and foremost, but also as a European construct in the wider sense.
You mentioned that Russia is one of the countries that is watched very close for cyber. I'm going to just say cyber warfare. They are very dedicated to cyber attacks. Talk to me about China. Are there similar concerns about where China is in terms of the cyberspace?
I think clearly we have seen Chinese criminal linked groups that are using the cyber capability to again limit the country's policy autonomy or direct the foreign policy stance in a certain way. And one specific case is that last year, when it comes to the US, we already know the Sal typhoon is a wide notice case. But for Europe, many European lawmakers, 3 of them from Romania, were attacked because they are part of pact, which is an alliance against China that is global. Their data was attacked by these cyber folks directed from China in order to access their data, to collect intelligence and ultimately silence them, because they were speaking against what China is doing in terms of human rights, in terms of security agenda, and basically threatening our European way of life.
Okay, we've got about 1 minute left, Antonia. I want to ask, you mentioned in your article, these member nations should not be waiting for Brussels before they start to act on their own. Talk to me about why that's important, that they don't wait for that central okay.
Because the European Union's decisions on cyber defense are very much still dependent on all the countries agreeing to the way forward. And I think that it will not happen anytime soon. Why is that? Because if we do not have a threat perception that is widely accepted, not speak about China, but not even for Russia, we can speak of a common threat. We cannot talk about the tools that we are going to use in that sense. So this is why I think that we should use frameworks like PESCO to have a voluntary mechanism in which countries can do more exercises in the cyberspace and create more interoperability between their already existing cyber teams.
I'm so sorry. We are up against the clock, but this is a fascinating subject. Again, we are talking with Antonia-Laura Pup. She's a policy fellow with Young Voices Europe. Where can people find you on social media?
They can find me on LinkedIn, where I post also all my articles, but create other new ones just using my name, Antonia-Laura Pup.